genetic power. The most awesome force this planet has ever seen. We're talking about something that literally changed the course of natural history. Scientists took creatures that vanished 65 million years ago and brought them back. Put them on display for the whole world to see. And yeah, it was incredible at first. This is a beautiful, almost impossible vision of coexistence between humans and dinosaurs. These precious, brief moments where everything seemed peaceful, where it felt like maybe we could actually pull this off. But emphasis on brief because those moments never lasted long. When nature tried to correct itself, when that volcano on Isla Nublar erupted and threatened to wipe out every dinosaur on the island, most people saw it as a tragedy. But here's the twisted part. Greed is what saved those dinosaurs from the lava. Rich people and corporations who saw dollar signs in prehistoric DNA. They rescued the creatures from certain death, only to throw them right back in cages, lock them up, control them, use them. But then compassion entered the picture, real compassion, from people who actually cared, and they set the dinosaurs free, released them into the wild, and once they were free, those creatures spread everywhere. Into every corner of the planet, cities, forests, mountains, jungles. Dinosaurs walked the earth again, not in some controlled island park, but everywhere. Now, humanity was facing the biggest question we'd ever had to answer. Could we actually coexist with these creatures? Could we put aside our massive ego, our need to control and dominate everything, and just work with nature this time? Could we finally let life find a way? Because if there's one thing the history of evolution has taught us, it's this. Life will not be contained. Life breaks free. It doesn't matter how many walls you build, how many security systems you install, how many protocols you create. Life tears down every barrier, shatters every cage, and does exactly what it wants. That's what happened over and over again with dinosaurs, breaking free time after time until we arrived here, at this moment, where dinosaurs and humans share the same world and nobody really knows if that's going to work out or end in absolute disaster. The Department of Fish and Wildlife had their hands full. That's putting it mildly. They had dinosaurs showing up in suburban neighborhoods, nesting in national parks, hunting livestock on farms. It was chaos. Beautiful, terrifying chaos. So they did what government agencies do when they're overwhelmed. They created a new organization, the Dinosaur Integration Network, DIN for short. The whole concept was ambitious as hell. Build facilities all over the world where these ancient creatures could live safely while humans figured out how to actually share the planet with them. Research, conservation, education, maybe some entertainment mixed in, they needed it all. But most importantly, they needed someone to run this massive operation. Someone with real experience managing dinosaurs, someone who understood both the science and the brutal reality of what these creatures were capable of. That's where Cabot Finch enters the story. Our guy Cabot had been around, he'd worked at park sites before, knew dinosaurs inside and out, understood management and logistics. When DIN came calling and offered him the position of managing director for the entire network, he didn't hesitate. He stepped up, took on the responsibility of proving that coexistence wasn't just some naive dream, but something humanity could actually achieve. But the Department of Fish and Wildlife wasn't going to let him do this alone. They assigned him a partner. A handler, really, someone to make sure he stayed in line with government expectations. Her name was Kira Chang, and she was sharp as a blade, professional, intelligent, and honestly pretty skeptical about whether this whole coexistence thing was even possible. She'd seen too many failures, too many disasters. She knew that dinosaurs didn't follow rules or respect boundaries. But she also knew that something had to be done, and DIN was humanity's best shot at finding a solution. Their first meeting happened in Montana. Wide open land, mountains in the distance, and absolutely nothing built yet. Just empty space that would eventually become DIN headquarters. Ground zero for the entire operation. Cabot stood there looking at dirt and grass, imagining what it could become, while Kira laid out the expectations. The Department of Fish and Wildlife wanted results. They wanted proof that coexistence wasn't just possible, but sustainable. They wanted to see dinosaurs thriving in managed environments without constant catastrophes. And they wanted all of this done quickly, efficiently, and within budget. No pressure at all, right? Just save humanity's relationship with the most dangerous creatures to ever walk the planet while staying under budget and meeting government deadlines. Cabot took it all in. He knew the challenges waiting for him. Dinosaurs weren't domestic animals. They weren't pets you could train or attractions you could program. They were wild, unpredictable, and incredibly dangerous. Every single species had different needs, different behaviors, different ways of tearing you apart if you made a mistake. Somehow, he had to prove that humans and dinosaurs could exist in the same spaces without everything going to hell. Kira watched him standing there, arms crossed, probably wondering if he was going to crack under the pressure. She asked him straight up if he thought he could handle it. And Cabot, he didn't have all the answers. Nobody did. This was uncharted territory, but he had determination, experience, and this stubborn belief that it could work. Building the Montana facility from scratch was intense. They started simple, smart, bringing in herbivores first, the peaceful ones, species that weren't going to immediately try to kill everything around them. Struthiomimus came first, these fast little dinosaurs that looked like ostriches crossed with lizards. Quick, nervous, but manageable. Then Edmontosaurus, gentle giants that basically just wanted to eat plants all day long and be left alone. The strategy was clear. Prove that humans could safely manage dinosaur populations before bringing in anything that could bite your head off. Show the Department of Fish and Wildlife that DIN knew what it was doing. Build trust, build infrastructure, build success. But keeping dinosaurs alive wasn't the goal. That was the bare minimum. The real goal was making them thrive, making them healthy, content, exhibiting natural behaviors. Every species had specific needs that had to be met perfectly. Food requirements, water sources, territory size, environmental conditions. Some dinosaurs loved forests and needed dense vegetation to feel secure. Others preferred wide open grasslands where they could see predators coming from miles away. Some species were incredibly social, needing their own kind around them constantly or they'd get stressed and aggressive. Others were total loners who'd attack any dinosaur that came near their space. Cabot spent countless hours studying behaviors, watching how different species interacted, adjusting enclosures and environments until everything clicked into place. And it worked. The Montana facility started running smooth, numbers looked good, dinosaurs were healthy and exhibiting natural behaviors. Guest satisfaction scores climbed as visitors came to see these incredible creatures up close in safe, controlled environments. Kira was impressed, even though she didn't show it much. That wasn't her style. But Cabot could tell. The facility was exceeding expectations, so they added more species. Parasaurolophus, with those gorgeous head crests that made haunting calls across the valleys. Maiasaura, the good mother lizards who protected their nest with fierce dedication. Pachycephalosaurus, those thick-skulled headbangers who loved ramming into each other for dominance. Each new species brought fresh challenges and new dynamics to manage, but Cabot was learning fast, adapting, getting better at reading what the dinosaurs needed before problems emerged. The Department of Fish and Wildlife was watching closely. They saw the success happening in Montana, and something clicked for them. This could actually work. One facility was proof of concept, but coexistence on a global scale, that required expansion. Multiple facilities across different climates, different environments, different challenges. DIN needed to go international. Kira pulled up maps during a planning meeting, and Cabot's jaw almost hit the floor. Sites all over the world. Hawaii for specialized breeding research, Las Vegas for entertainment and public engagement, China for the massive herbivores that needed enormous territories, Indonesia, Japan, Malta, facilities across Europe. Each location would require custom approaches, specialized management, unique solutions to unique problems. This wasn't just a park operation anymore. This was a worldwide network attempting to completely rewrite the relationship between humanity and the most powerful creatures to ever exist on Earth. Cabot stood there looking at those maps, feeling the weight of it all. This was bigger than anything he'd imagined when he first took the job. Kira asked if he was ready for this level of expansion, this level of responsibility. And Cabot, he grinned. Because, yeah, it was terrifying. Yeah, it was probably going to be the hardest thing he'd ever done. But it was also the most important thing he'd ever do. So he told her, let's find out, and they started building a global network. Hawaii became the site for DIN's most ambitious scientific project, the breeding program. And the guy running it was Dr. Louis Baldera, one of the most passionate scientists Cabot had ever met. Louis didn't just see dinosaurs as research subjects or conservation projects. He saw them as species that deserved a future, real genetic diversity, healthy populations, long-term survival. When Cabot first visited the Hawaii facility, Louis practically vibrated with excitement, showing him around. The labs were cutting edge. The enclosures were specifically designed for breeding pairs, and the whole operation had this energy of hope and possibility. Luis explained his vision while walking Cabot through the facility. They weren't just housing dinosaurs in Hawaii. They were securing the future of entire species. By carefully managing breeding pairs, monitoring genetic lines, and using advanced genetic science, they could prevent inbreeding, maintain healthy populations, and maybe even fix some of the genetic mistakes that InGen made decades ago when they first brought these creatures back. But breeding programs came with major complications. Baby dinosaurs meant more mouths to feed, more space needed, more resources required, and some species were incredibly difficult to breed in captivity. They needed perfect conditions, specific environmental triggers, the right social structures. Get one element wrong and they just wouldn't reproduce. Luis had his work absolutely cut out for him, but that man was dedicated beyond anything Cabot had seen. They started with herbivore species, the easier ones to manage, less dangerous if something went wrong with a juvenile or if a breeding pair got aggressive. Cabot helped set up specialized enclosures, brought in equipment Luis requested, made sure the facility had everything needed for success, and then it happened. The moment that changed everything for the breeding program. The first successful clutch of eggs. Luis monitored them obsessively, checking temperatures, humidity levels, making sure conditions stayed perfect. And one morning, the eggs started cracking. Tiny snouts poked through shells, little claws scraped at the inside. And then baby dinosaurs emerged, blinking in the light, taking their first breaths in this new world. Luis was beside himself, actually crying with joy. He grabbed Cabot and said, "This is it. This is what coexistence looks like. Not controlling these creatures, not exploiting them for profit or entertainment, helping them survive and thrive in a world that humans reshaped, giving them a real chance at a future." Cabot watched those baby dinosaurs take their first wobbly steps, stumbling around the enclosure, and something shifted inside him. This wasn't just about park management anymore. This wasn't about meeting government expectations or proving critics wrong. This was about responsibility. These creatures didn't ask to be brought back from extinction, didn't ask to exist in a world dominated by humans and modern ecosystems they weren't evolved for. But here they were, alive and vulnerable and completely dependent on humans making the right choices. Humanity owed them a chance, a real chance. The Hawaii breeding program became a cornerstone of everything DIN stood for. Word spread through scientific communities, conservation organizations, even reached mainstream media. People started seeing DIN differently, not as just another theme park trying to make money off dinosaurs, but as something more meaningful, something that actually cared about these creatures as living beings with value beyond entertainment or research. But not everyone was happy about DIN's success. Not everyone believed coexistence was the answer. Las Vegas, city of lights, excess, spectacle, and now dinosaurs. The Vegas facility had a completely different vibe than Hawaii's conservation focus or Montana's research emphasis. Vegas was about entertainment, giving people what they wanted. Thrills, excitement, experiences they couldn't get anywhere else. And the guy running that operation was Isaac Clement, a showman through and through. When Cabot first met Isaac, the man was already pitching ideas like a carnival barker. "Think about it," Isaac said, gesturing wildly with his hands. "Dinosaur shows with carefully choreographed feeding demonstrations, safe encounter experiences where regular people could get close to these magnificent creatures. Interactive exhibits where guests felt like they were part of the prehistoric world." "This is Vegas," Isaac kept saying. "We don't do boring here, we do spectacle." Cabot felt uneasy from the start. There was nothing inherently wrong with entertainment or helping people appreciate dinosaurs through engaging experiences. Education and entertainment could coexist beautifully when done right, but Isaac's enthusiasm felt off somehow, like the animals were props in a show instead of living beings that deserved respect and proper care. Still, DIN needed funding desperately. The whole network ran on a combination of government grants and revenue generated from guest visits. If Vegas could pull in tourists and their money while maintaining proper animal welfare standards, maybe it could work. The entertainment dollars could fund conservation efforts at other facilities. It was a compromise, but possibly a necessary one. So Cabot helped Isaac build something spectacular. Exhibits designed for maximum visual impact. Viewing areas positioned perfectly so guests could watch dinosaurs in action from safe distances. Carefully controlled feeding times that drew massive crowds. The sound design alone was incredible, amplifying dinosaur calls so they echoed dramatically across the facility. It felt like Jurassic Park, but done right, done safely. The Vegas facility exploded in popularity almost immediately. People flew in from across the country, across the world, just to see real, living dinosaurs up close. Revenue poured in like a flood. DNH's operating budget expanded significantly. They could fund more research at Hawaii, more conservation at China, more facilities everywhere. Financial success meant the mission could continue growing. But success bred new problems, like it always does. Isaac kept pushing for more. Bigger dinosaurs, more dangerous species, more exciting attractions. He started arguing they needed to bring in carnivores. People want to see the big predators, Isaac insisted. They want Tyrannosaurus Rex, Spinosaurus, the real star attractions. The herbivores are nice, but they don't get people's hearts racing. We need the dangerous ones, the killer. That's what sells tickets. Cabot pushed back hard. Those aren't entertainers, Isaac. They're apex predators. One mistake, one system failure, one moment of human error, and people die. We're not risking lives for ticket sales. But Isaac had answers ready. That's why we have protocols, he countered. Safety measures, backup systems, trained staff. We can do this right. We can give people the thrill of seeing predators while keeping everyone safe. It became this constant tension running through the Vegas operation. Entertainment versus conservation, profit versus safety, making money versus protecting lives. And Cabot found himself stuck right in the middle, trying to balance both sides without compromising either. Kira wasn't thrilled about the direction Vegas was heading. She pulled Cabot aside during one of his visits and warned him straight up. The Department of Fish and Wildlife is watching Vegas very closely. One incident, one containment breach, one guest injury, and they'll shut down the entire entertainment program, maybe the whole network. Everything you've built could collapse because of one mistake in Vegas. The pressure kept mounting from all directions, but the Vegas facility was working. At least for now. Guests were happy and kept coming back, dinosaurs were healthy despite the show schedules, and the money kept flowing in, funding operations across the entire network. How long could they maintain that delicate balance? Cabot was about to find out, but not in Vegas. The real test was coming from halfway around the world. China. Vast landscapes, ancient history, mountains that touch the sky, and now home to DNH's sanctuary for the largest dinosaurs that ever walked the earth. The China facility specialized in the giants, the absolute units of the dinosaur world. Brachiosaurus, those towering long necks that could look down at 3-story buildings and still see over them. Apatosaurus, Mamenchisaurus, Dreadnoughtus, creatures so massive that elephants looked like house pets next to them. Managing animals that size required completely different strategies than anything else in the DNH network. These dinosaurs needed enormous amounts of food every single day, hundreds and hundreds of pounds of vegetation per animal. They needed huge territories to roam, or they'd get stressed and sick. And the infrastructure had to handle their sheer size and weight. Regular fencing wouldn't cut it. Regular buildings would get accidentally demolished. Everything had to be scaled up to match these living mountains. Cabot visited the China site to help with setup and planning, and standing next to a fully grown Brachiosaurus was one of the most humbling experiences of his life. This animal weighed as much as 12 elephants combined, could eat an entire tree's worth of leaves in a single day, and moved with this impossible grace despite being so massive. Watching it walk felt like watching a building come to life and dance. The team managing the China facility had their hands absolutely full. Feeding schedules alone required military-level coordination and logistics. They basically grew entire forests just to keep the herbivore population fed. Water systems needed constant maintenance because these animals drank like living waterfalls. And if one of the giants got sick, God help everyone, because treating an animal that size was a nightmare of logistics and specialized veterinary care. But there was something magical about the China sanctuary, something that made all the difficulties worth it. Watching these creatures exist peacefully, towering over the landscape like living mountains from another age. It felt prehistoric in the absolute best way, like stepping into a time machine and going back 65 million years. Guests who visited China weren't looking for thrills like they were in Vegas. They weren't there for shows or spectacle. They came for awe, for wonder, to stand in the presence of something so much bigger than themselves and feel small in the best possible way. To remember that humans aren't the biggest, strongest, most impressive things on this planet. That nature created things far more magnificent than anything we could build. The China sanctuary proved something crucial for Din's mission. Different facilities could serve completely different purposes, and all of them mattered. Entertainment in Vegas brought in money. Conservation in Hawaii secured genetic futures. Research in Montana established protocols. Education in China inspired wonder and respect. All of it contributed to the larger goal of coexistence. All of it proved that humans and dinosaurs could share space when both were respected properly. While China flourished with its giants and Vegas thrived on spectacle, and Hawaii bred new generations, another facility was about to face a crisis that would test everything Din stood for, everything they'd built, everything they believed about coexistence. Indonesia. Tropical jungles, humid air thick enough to choke on, and dinosaurs that were dying. When Cabot got the emergency call from the Indonesia facility, his stomach dropped to his feet. Dr. Sarah Harding, the lead scientist there, was one of the most composed people he'd ever worked with. Calm under pressure, rational, scientific, but her voice on that call sounded terrified. "We've got an outbreak," she said. "Some kind of disease spreading through the dinosaur population. We're losing animals fast. Multiple species affected. We don't know what it is or how to stop." Cabot didn't hesitate. He jumped on the next flight to Indonesia, bringing medical specialists, veterinary experts, equipment, anything that might help contain whatever was happening. What he found when he arrived was absolutely devastating. Dinosaurs lying motionless in their enclosures, barely breathing, some showing severe respiratory distress, gasping for air like drowning on dry land. Others had strange lesions covering their skin, wounds that appeared from nothing. The mortality rate was climbing every hour. They were losing multiple animals per day. Dr. Harding was running on pure adrenaline and caffeine, probably hadn't slept in days. She pulled up data on computer screens, showing Cabot the spread pattern. "We've never seen anything like this," she explained with exhaustion in her voice. "It's spreading incredibly fast, jumping between different species like it doesn't care about biological boundaries. If we don't contain it here at this facility, it could spread to other Din locations, maybe even to wild dinosaur populations across the globe." The implications hit Cabot like a physical blow. If a deadly disease escaped into the global dinosaur population, it could trigger an extinction event. The very creatures they were working so hard to save could be wiped out by something invisible and unstoppable. Not by volcanoes or human greed or habitat loss, but by microscopic death they couldn't even see coming. Cabot made the hardest decision of his entire career right there. Full quarantine, complete lockdown. Nobody comes in, nobody goes out until we figure out what this is and how to stop it. The Indonesia facility went dark. No visitors allowed, no animal transfers, no communication except absolute emergencies. The team trapped inside worked around the clock, taking samples, running tests, trying every treatment they could think of. Experimental drugs, antibiotics, antivirals, everything in the veterinary arsenal. Days blurred together into one endless nightmare of dying animals and failed treatments. They kept losing dinosaurs, good ones, animals that had survived Jurassic World's collapse, survived the volcano on Isla Nublar, survived being captured and relocated, survived the transition into Din's care. Creatures that had overcome so much, only to die from some mysterious illness nobody could identify or treat. The emotional toll on the Indonesia team was brutal. Every death felt personal, every failure cut deep, and then Dr. Harding found something in the data, a pattern buried in the genetic sequencing of the disease itself. She pulled Cabot into the lab, her face pale, and showed him the computer analysis. "This disease isn't natural," she said quietly. "It's engineered. Someone created this in a laboratory. These genetic markers, they don't occur in nature. This is biological warfare specifically designed to target dinosaurs." Cabot felt ice-cold fury wash through his entire body. Someone did this on purpose. Someone deliberately created a weapon to kill these animals. Who would do this? Who had the resources, the knowledge, the pure malice to engineer a disease meant to wipe out dinosaurs? That's when they heard the name for the first time. A name that would haunt Din for months to come: Extinction Now. Extinction Now was a radical extremist group that believed dinosaurs shouldn't exist at all. They saw the creatures as abominations against nature, genetic mistakes that needed to be erased from the planet. They believed that humans bringing dinosaurs back was playing God in the worst possible way, and the only solution was complete extinction. And they were willing to kill, to use bioweapons, to commit acts of terrorism to make that happen. Intelligence reports started flooding in once Din realized what they were dealing with. Extinction Now wasn't some fringe group of conspiracy theorists meeting in basements. They had real resources, serious organization, and apparently access to advanced bioweapons technology. The Indonesia outbreak wasn't a random occurrence or a natural disease. It was a deliberate attack, the opening move in a campaign of terror against dinosaurs and everyone trying to protect them. George Lambert became Cabot's right hand during this crisis. Former military, special forces background, absolutely no-nonsense attitude. He'd been hired as Din's head of security back when they thought the biggest threat was escaped dinosaurs or tourist accidents. Now he was dealing with domestic terrorism and biological warfare. George called an emergency meeting with Cabot and the facility directors. "We need to harden every single facility immediately," he said, laying out tactical plans. Better surveillance systems, armed security guards, comprehensive screening protocols for everyone who enters Din property. Staff, guests, delivery personnel, everyone. These people are serious, and they've already proven they can infiltrate our operations. Kira was absolutely furious. Not at George or Cabot, but at the situation. "The Department of Fish and Wildlife is demanding answers," she said during a video conference. How did terrorists infiltrate a Din facility? How did they weaponize a disease and introduce it into the dinosaur population? This makes the entire network look incompetent. They're questioning whether Din can even function as a secure organization. But Cabot wasn't focused on politics or optics right now. He was focused on pure survival. They managed to develop a treatment for the Indonesia outbreak. Took weeks of constant work, but they did it. Saved most of the remaining animals and brought the disease under control. George designed and implemented quarantine protocols across every facility. Security went from casual to military grade overnight. Background checks on all staff intensified dramatically. Surveillance systems got upgraded across the entire network. Armed security became standard at every location. It changed the whole atmosphere of Din. What started as this hopeful vision of coexistence now felt like a fortress under siege. But it was necessary because Extinction Now struck again. A sabotage attempt at the Hawaii breeding facility. They infiltrated through a contractor company, got someone inside with fake credentials. That person tried to poison the water supply, feeding the breeding enclosures. Would have killed dozens of animals and probably staff members too. But George's new security team caught them just in time. Intercepted the saboteur literally minutes before the poison would have entered the water system. The terrorist was arrested and interrogated by federal agents, but they didn't give up much useful information. Just kept repeating their extremist manifesto like a broken recording. Dinosaurs are mistakes. Playing God has consequences. Humanity needs to undo what it created. Life shouldn't be contained or controlled. Which was ironic as hell, considering that's exactly what Din believed too, that life shouldn't be contained or controlled. But Din wanted coexistence and cooperation. Extinction Now wanted complete extinction. Total erasure of every dinosaur on the planet. The attacks put enormous pressure on Cabot and his entire team. Every single day felt like waiting for the next bomb to drop, literal or metaphorical. Staff members were scared, looking over their shoulders constantly. Guests were nervous about visiting facilities that might be terrorist targets. The whole mission felt fragile, like one more major disaster could collapse everything they'd worked so hard to build. But Cabot refused to give up. They'd come too far, proven too much, demonstrated that dinosaurs and humans could share this world safely and successfully. They just needed time to refine the systems, to strengthen security, to show that terrorism wouldn't win. And then, just when things couldn't possibly seem more complicated, when they were already dealing with terrorists and bioweapons and constant security threats, they got a distress call from Japan. Another crisis, another facility in danger. The hits just kept coming. The Japan facility was different from every other location in the DIN network. It wasn't new construction, built from the ground up with modern technology and fresh designs. It was old. Really old. Decades old, actually. Years ago, long before Jurassic World became a household name, before everything went to absolute hell on Isla Nublar, there was another park. Another ambitious attempt at bringing dinosaurs to the masses and making it profitable. It was built in the Japanese countryside, massive investment, state-of-the-art technology for its time, and it failed spectacularly. The park shut down, got abandoned, left to rot and decay. Nature reclaimed it slowly over the years. Vines grew through broken windows, trees pushed through cracked concrete, rust consumed the metal infrastructure. It became a graveyard of failed dreams and corporate hubris. Now DIN was trying to restore it, turn those ruins into something functional, something that could honor the complicated past while building toward a better future. It was symbolic in a way, taking humanity's failures and transforming them into something meaningful. Redemption through reconstruction. When Cabot first walked through the rusted gates of the old Japan facility, it felt haunting, ghost-like. Empty enclosures with shattered viewing windows. Exhibits completely overtaken by wild vegetation. Pathways cracked and broken, leading to buildings that were more holes than walls. There was something deeply unsettling about seeing the remnants of what people had tried to build. All that money, all that effort, all those dreams, reduced to corroding metal and crumbling concrete. It was a reminder that humans had tried this before and failed, that bringing dinosaurs back for entertainment and profit had ended in disaster multiple times. But it was also hopeful in a strange way, because this time was different. This time, they weren't building an amusement park designed to extract maximum revenue from guests. They were building a sanctuary. The restoration work was slow, expensive, and honestly pretty depressing at times. Every corner they turned revealed new damage, new evidence of the catastrophe that shut this place down decades ago. Structural engineers found problems that would take months to fix. Environmental specialists discovered contamination that needed careful remediation. It was a massive undertaking, but bit by bit, section by section, the facility started coming back to life. New infrastructure replaced old failures, modern safety systems got installed throughout. They kept some of the original architecture as a reminder, a living museum of what came before, but everything else was rebuilt to current standards. They brought in dinosaur species carefully, learning from all the past mistakes that were literally written into the walls around them. No aggressive carnivores yet, just resilient herbivore species that could handle the transitional environment while construction continued, species known for adaptability and stable temperaments. And then they found something. Deep in the old laboratory section, hidden behind collapsed walls and decades of forgotten equipment. The restoration crew discovered a sealed room. When they finally got the door open, they found research files. Extensive research files. And the name on those files made everyone stop cold: Dr. Henry Wu. Henry Wu. That name carried massive weight in the world of dinosaurs. The infamous geneticist who created half the species walking the planet. The man whose genetic innovations brought extinct creatures back to life. Some people called him a visionary genius who changed the course of scientific history. Others called him a monster who played God without considering the consequences. Either way, his work was everywhere, in every dinosaur's DNA, in every facility's population, in every success and failure of de-extinction technology, and apparently he'd been working in Japan before everything collapsed, working on something he never got to finish. Dr. Harding flew in from Indonesia to examine the files personally. She was one of the few scientists with the expertise to understand Wu's advanced genetic work. When she started reading through the data, her eyes went wide. Her hands actually shook holding the documents. "This is incredible," she said, barely able to contain her excitement. "This could change everything we're doing." Wu was developing methods to make dinosaurs more adaptable, ways to help them survive in modern ecosystems without constant human intervention. Genetic modifications that would let them regulate their own body chemistry better, adapt to different climates faster, resist diseases more effectively. It was revolutionary work. But there was a dark side buried in the research too. There always was with Wu's work. Experiments that crossed serious ethical lines. genetic modifications designed to increase aggression for entertainment value, techniques to accelerate growth rates at the cost of long-term health, methods to enhance specific traits for commercial appeal while ignoring animal welfare. Wu's brilliance always came with a shadow. His genius was undeniable, but so was his willingness to sacrifice ethics for results. Cabot had to make a decision, standing there in that old laboratory surrounded by ghosts of failed experiments. Use this research to help Din's mission, or bury it like the ruins around them? Pretend they never found it and avoid the ethical complications? In the end, they compromised. They took what was scientifically sound and ethically acceptable, techniques that could genuinely help dinosaurs adapt and thrive without causing harm or suffering. Everything else got archived as a warning. Documentation of what not to do. How scientific ambition without ethical boundaries leads to disaster. The past had lessons to teach, both good and bad, and ignoring either would be stupid. Japan slowly transformed over months of careful work, from a graveyard of corporate failure into a symbol of redemption, proof that even humanity's worst mistakes could be acknowledged, learned from, and rebuilt into something better. The facility opened quietly, without the fanfare of Vegas or the scientific prestige of Hawaii. Just steady, meaningful work focused on giving dinosaurs a safe space while honoring the complicated history of how they came to exist. But while Cabot was dealing with restoration and ethics in Japan, problems were brewing in another part of the network. Problems that had nothing to do with dinosaurs or terrorists or disease outbreaks. Problems that were somehow even harder to solve. Financial problems. The Malta facility was drowning, not in water, but in debt. Crushing, overwhelming, facility-ending debt. Malta was supposed to be Din's European showcase, their statement facility on the Mediterranean. The concept was brilliant and unique, a facility focused specifically on nocturnal species, creatures of the night that most people never got to see because they were asleep or hiding during normal daylight hours. Troodon, those small, clever hunters with huge eyes built for darkness. Dimorphodon, the flying reptiles that swooped through night skies. Dozens of species that came alive after sunset when other facilities were closing for the day. The idea was to create nighttime exhibitions with specialized lighting that wouldn't disturb the animals, but would let guests see them in action. A completely different experience than traditional daytime dinosaur viewing. It was innovative, exciting, and incredibly expensive. Getting Malta operational required enormous upfront investment. Specialized infrastructure that could support nocturnal schedules, advanced lighting systems that mimicked moonlight and starlight without causing stress to the animals, marketing campaigns to convince people that visiting a dinosaur facility at night was worth the trip, and everything cost more than projected, way more. Construction costs exploded past initial estimates, the specialized equipment didn't work as planned and needed constant expensive modifications. Marketing campaigns flopped because people didn't understand the concept or weren't interested in nocturnal viewing. Guest numbers stayed stubbornly low despite all the investment, and revenue couldn't keep pace with the mounting expenses. Malta was bleeding money like a severed artery. The facility director was desperate, practically begged Cabot for help during video conferences that got more panicked each week. "We're gonna lose everything," he said, exhaustion and fear clear in his voice. "All this work, all these animals, all this potential, gone because we can't pay the bills. Banks are calling in loans, suppliers are threatening to stop deliveries. Staff haven't gotten raises in over a year. We're maybe 3 months from total collapse." Cabot looked at the financial reports and physically winced. The numbers were brutal. Malta was in a death spiral. But shutting it down would mean relocating dozens of specialized nocturnal dinosaurs, losing years of research into their behaviors, abandoning the European market entirely, and sending a message to the world that Din couldn't sustain itself. That coexistence wasn't financially viable. That would be a propaganda victory for Extinction Now and every other group that wanted dinosaurs gone. Cabot needed a miracle, or at least someone who was really, really good with money and crisis management. That's when Lily Halford's name came up. Someone on the Din board, Cabot never found out who exactly, recommended her. Said she had an incredible reputation. Brilliant crisis manager who specialized in turning around failing projects. She'd worked with government agencies, private corporations, nonprofits. had connections across multiple sectors. If anyone could save Malta from financial collapse, it was Lily Halford. Lily walked into Cabot's office for their first meeting like she owned the place. Confident without being arrogant, professional with an edge of intensity that made you pay attention. She was probably in her late 30s, dressed like someone who meant business, carrying a tablet loaded with data she'd already gathered about DIN's operations. "I've reviewed Malta's financial situation in detail," she said, pulling up spreadsheets and projections before even sitting down. "It's bad. Really bad. But it's fixable. You need to restructure operations completely, cut unnecessary expenditures, and implement aggressive revenue generation strategies. I can help with that. I've done it dozens of times for organizations in worse shape than Malta." Cabot was skeptical from the start. Something about her rubbed him wrong, though he couldn't identify exactly what. "We're not just a business," he said carefully. "We can't sacrifice animal welfare for profit margins. These are living creatures, not products. If fixing Malta's finances means compromising care standards, then we'll find another way." Lily smiled at that. It wasn't a warm smile exactly, but it seemed genuine. "I wouldn't ask you to compromise welfare," she said. "That would be short-sighted and ultimately counterproductive. But there's waste in every organization, especially ones that grow as fast as DIN has. Inefficiencies. Areas where you're spending more than necessary without improving outcomes. Contracts that are overpriced. Systems that are redundant. Let me find those problems and fix them. Let me cut the fat without touching the muscle." It sounded reasonable. Against his instincts, Cabot agreed to bring her on board for Malta, give her access to the financial systems, let her work her magic, see if she could actually deliver results. Lily went to Malta and got to work immediately, and honestly, she was incredible. Within just a few weeks, she'd renegotiated vendor contracts and saved thousands per month, streamlined operational procedures, and reduced labor costs without cutting staff. Launched new marketing campaigns that actually resonated with European audiences. Guest numbers started climbing steadily, revenue improved week over week, the debt became manageable instead of crushing. Malta went from circling the drain to stable operations in less than 2 months. Cabot was impressed despite his initial skepticism. Kira was impressed, and she was hard to impress. Even George grudgingly admitted that Lily knew what she was doing. So when other facilities started having problems, financial or operational or logistical, they called Lily. She became DIN's go-to crisis manager, the person who showed up when things were falling apart and somehow put them back together. She helped Vegas optimize their entertainment shows without compromising safety protocols, restructured China's massive feeding programs to cut costs significantly without reducing food quality or quantity, even assisted with Indonesia's recovery after the bioweapon outbreak, managing the public relations disaster and helping rebuild community trust in DIN's security measures. Lily Halford became essential to the network, trusted by everyone, part of the inner circle of people Cabot relied on for major decisions. She had access to everything: financial systems across all facilities, operational protocols, security schedules, guest data, personnel files, everything a crisis manager would need to identify and solve problems quickly. And nobody suspected a thing, not even George, whose job was literally to be suspicious of everyone. Lily was too good at her role, too helpful, too successful, too perfectly positioned. She became invisible through sheer competence, just another trusted member of the team working toward the same goal of coexistence and conservation. While Lily was quietly infiltrating every system DIN had, another project was developing. Something that connected to the very roots of how dinosaurs came back in the first place. The Lockwood Estate. That name carried enormous weight in dinosaur history. Lockwood Manor in Northern California. The massive property that belonged to Benjamin Lockwood, the old partner of John Hammond. The man who helped create the technology that made de-extinction possible. His estate was basically a monument to the Jurassic Age, filled with fossils, DNA samples, laboratories, libraries of research. After Lockwood died and his granddaughter Maisie grew up and moved on with her life, the estate just sat there, empty, decaying slowly. This enormous property, full of history and ghosts, abandoned to time and weather. DIN acquired it through a complicated deal with the Lockwood Family Trust. They saw potential in the location, not as an active dinosaur facility, but as something different, a research center focused on the history and ethics of de-extinction. a museum documenting the complicated legacy of what humanity had created, a training facility for future geneticists and conservationists, a place to honor the past while trying to build a better future. Cabot visited during the early restoration work. Walking through those halls felt absolutely surreal. This was where so many critical decisions were made that shaped everything about the modern world. Where Hammond and Lockwood dreamed of bringing extinct creatures back to life and actually succeeded. Where Maisie Lockwood discovered she was a clone, that she shared more with dinosaurs than she ever imagined. Where the line between human and creation got blurred beyond recognition. Dr. Ellie Sattler joined the Lockwood Estate project. She'd been involved with dinosaurs since the absolute beginning. Survived the original Jurassic Park disaster, witnessed firsthand the chaos of Isla Nublar. Spent decades studying these creatures and the consequences of bringing them back. Now older, wiser, carrying the weight of all that experience, she was still deeply committed to understanding dinosaurs and helping humanity navigate this new reality. This place represents everything we got wrong, Ellie said during one of Cabot's visits. They were standing in the old laboratory where Wu and other scientists had worked decades ago. But it also represents everything we could get right if we actually learn from those mistakes instead of just repeating them with better technology. They set up extensive archives in the manor, preserving documents, genetic samples, research notes, everything that could teach future generations about responsible genetics and ethical science. Created educational programs for university students studying de-extinction technology. Hosted conferences where experts from around the world debated the ethics and implications of bringing back extinct species, not just dinosaurs, but the whole field of resurrection biology. The Lockwood Estate became Din's intellectual and ethical heart. Not flashy like Vegas with its shows and spectacle, not massive like China with its giant herbivores, not scientifically cutting edge like Hawaii with its breeding programs, but important in its own quiet way, a place for reflection, education, and wrestling with the complicated morality of playing God with genetic. And then Ian Malcolm showed up unannounced one day. Dr. Ian Malcolm, chaos theory mathematician, Jurassic Park survivor, professional pessimist, and I told you so guy. He'd been warning about dinosaurs for literally decades. Said from the very beginning that bringing them back was humanity's arrogance at its absolute worst. Predicted disaster after disaster, and honestly, he'd been right every single time. Every park failed, every containment system broke, every assurance that things were under control turned out to be dangerously naive. Malcolm had earned his pessimism through being correct over and over while people ignored him. So when Malcolm walked into DIN headquarters looking grim and serious, Cabot knew this wasn't going to be a fun conversation. "You're repeating the same mistakes," Malcolm said immediately. No pleasantries, no small talk, just straight to his point. Different packaging, same fundamental hubris. You really think you can manage this? Control coexistence? Create sustainable systems that won't eventually collapse, like every other attempt? Life finds a way, Mr. Finch. It always does, usually in ways you don't expect and definitely can't prepare for. That's the whole point of chaos theory applied to complex biological systems. Cabot tried to explain that DIN was different. We're not trying to control them like InGen did. We're not building theme parks focused on profit extraction. We're trying to work with nature, create genuinely sustainable coexistence between species, give dinosaurs space to exist as themselves, rather than as entertainment products or research subjects. But Malcolm just laughed. Not meanly, but with this tired cynicism of someone who'd heard it all before. Sustainable, he said. You've got dinosaurs in Las Vegas performing for tourists like circus animals. You're breeding them in Hawaii like livestock. You're calling it coexistence, but it's still a cage. A bigger cage, a prettier cage with better intentions, but a cage nonetheless. These animals aren't free. They're managed, controlled, constrained by human systems and human decisions. The words stung, specifically because they had truth in them. DIN wasn't perfect. They were constantly making compromises, balancing ideals against practical reality. But what was the alternative? Let dinosaurs rampage completely unchecked through modern ecosystems? Watch them either go extinct again or destroy existing wildlife? There were no clean answers. So what would you do? Cabot challenged Malcolm directly. If you were in charge, what would your solution be? Malcolm leaned back in his chair, considering the question seriously. "I'd stop pretending we can have it both ways," he said finally. Either we accept that dinosaurs are wild animals that belong in genuinely wild spaces, free from human interference and management, or we admit we're just running very sophisticated zoos and stop pretending it's anything more noble than that. Both options are valid, but the dishonesty of claiming Din is something between them, that's where the danger lives. It was a fair criticism, one that kept Cabot awake many nights, staring at ceilings and questioning everything. But Malcolm wasn't just there to criticize and philosophize about chaos theory. He'd seen something, heard rumors through his network of scientists and activists. "There's something happening inside Din," Malcolm said quietly, his whole demeanor changing. "Something that doesn't add up. I don't have proof, just patterns I'm noticing. Be very careful who you trust, Mr. Finch. Not everyone working for coexistence actually wants it to succeed." Before Cabot could ask what exactly he meant, what patterns he was seeing, Malcolm just left, dropped that cryptic warning, and walked away like some prophet delivering uncomfortable truths. Cabot tried to shake off the unease Malcolm's visit created, tried to tell himself the man was just paranoid, seeing conspiracies where there were only coincidences. Malcolm had been traumatized by his experiences. That kind of thing made people suspicious of everything. But the warning stuck in Cabot's mind like a splinter, nagging at him, making him look at familiar people and situations with new questions. Little did he know how absolutely right Malcolm was. How that warning was probably the most important thing anyone had told him in months. Things started getting weird across the Din network. Small things at first, easy to dismiss individually as random bad luck or equipment aging. But they kept happening. Systems malfunctioning at multiple facilities around the same time in ways that shouldn't be connected. Security camera footage mysteriously corrupting during specific time windows. Supplies going missing from storage with no explanation. Maintenance records showing work that staff didn't remember doing. Weird communication glitches during critical moments. George Lambert noticed the pattern first. That was his job as head of security, noticing things that didn't fit. He'd been tracking incidents in a database, doing what paranoid security people do, looking for connections that others might miss. And something felt deeply off about the pattern emerging. "These incidents, they're not random," he told Cabot during a private meeting in a conference room with the door locked. "Someone's coordinating them. These things are happening too close together, affecting too many different systems to be coincidence or bad luck." "Extinction now?" Cabot asked. That was the obvious conclusion. The terrorist group had already proven they could infiltrate Din facilities and cause major damage. Maybe. But George shook his head slowly. But the sabotage is too subtle for their usual tactics. Extinction now likes big, dramatic statements. Bioweapons, attempted mass releases, things that make headlines and spread their message. This feels different, more careful. Like someone inside helping coordinate attacks or gathering intelligence, like there's a mole inside Din. The thought made Cabot physically sick to his stomach. Someone on his team, someone he trusted and worked with every day, secretly working with terrorists who wanted to wipe out every dinosaur on Earth? It seemed impossible. He knew these people, had hired many of them personally. But George's military background made him think differently about security. Trust wasn't something you gave automatically based on familiarity. It was something you verified constantly through evidence. So George started investigating quietly. No accusations, no drama, just careful detective work, checking personnel files for inconsistencies, monitoring communication patterns for anomalies, looking at who had access to systems when problems occurred, looking for anything suspicious in backgrounds or behavior. But whoever was doing this, if anyone actually was, they were extremely careful. Really, really careful. Professional level operational security. Meanwhile, pressure from the Department of Fish and Wildlife kept mounting relentlessly. Budget reviews became more frequent and aggressive. Policy audits examined every decision Din made. Endless meetings where Kira had to defend the network's track record to skeptical government officials. Every little problem got magnified and scrutinized. Every incident became evidence that maybe Din wasn't actually capable of managing global dinosaur integration. "They are looking for excuses to shut us down," Kira said bluntly during a strategy session. Too many people in government still fundamentally believe dinosaurs should have stayed extinct. They're just waiting for Din to fail badly enough that they can justify shutting down the whole network and implementing much more aggressive containment measures, possibly even culling populations. It felt like everything was slowly coming apart at the seams. Financial problems in Malta even after Lily's intervention. security concerns spreading across facilities, evidence of internal sabotage, external terrorist threats, political opposition looking for any excuse to dismantle the network. And the dinosaurs, the actual creatures they were supposed to be protecting and helping, caught helplessly in the middle of all this human drama and dysfunction. Cabot pulled together his core team, the people he was most certain he could trust. Kira, George, Louise from Hawaii, Dr. Harding, Ellie Sattler. They met in a secure conference room with surveillance disabled. "We're missing something fundamental," Cabot said, exhaustion clear in his voice. "All these problems, all these incidents, they have to connect somehow. There's a pattern we're not seeing. We need to figure it out before everything collapses completely." They worked through the entire night, pulling data from every facility, comparing incident reports, looking for connections between seemingly unrelated problems, building timelines, mapping who had access to what systems, when things failed, and slowly, painfully, a picture started forming in the data. A pattern emerging from the chaos. Every single major crisis Din had faced over the past year had one thing in common. One person who was always there, always involved in the response, always in the perfect position to know exactly what was happening and when. One person with access to everything. Lily Halford. "No way," Louise said immediately when someone suggested her name. "Absolutely no way. Lily saved half our facilities from collapse. She's been instrumental in keeping Dean financially viable. She's one of the good ones." But George wasn't convinced. He'd been trained to think like an intelligence operative. "That's perfect cover," he said quietly. "She shows up during crises, solves problems, gains trust and credibility, gets access to absolutely everything. No one would ever suspect the person who's constantly fixing things of being the one creating them in the first place. It's brilliant from an operational standpoint." Cabot felt ice forming in his chest. Could it possibly be true? Had Lily been playing them this entire time, using her role as crisis manager to infiltrate every system, learn every weakness, position herself perfectly to sabotage everything from within? It seemed crazy. But the more they looked at the data, the more sense it made. George started digging deeper into Lily's background, really deep, beyond the professional resume and references she'd provided. Into financial records, communication patterns, associations. What he found over the next 72 hours of investigation was absolutely devastating. Lily Halford wasn't just a crisis manager, she was the crisis. She was the source of everything that had gone wrong. Financial records showed irregular payments from shell companies that couldn't be fully traced but had connections to known Extinction Now funding sources. Communication logs, once George cracked her encrypted channels, revealed messages coordinating sabotage across multiple facilities. Security footage carefully reviewed, frame by frame, showed Lily in restricted areas moments before critical systems failed. Always with plausible explanations if questioned, but the pattern was clear once you knew to look for it. She had been planning this infiltration for years, getting into position slowly, building trust methodically, waiting for the perfect moment to strike and bring everything crashing down. Why? What was driving this? What was her ultimate endgame? George finally found her real identity, buried under layers of false documentation. Lily Halford wasn't even her actual legal name. It was an alias. Her real name was Emily Lockwood, a distant relative of Benjamin Lockwood, who'd been cut out of the family fortune in a complicated legal battle years ago. She'd been raised hearing stories about how her branch of the family deserved the Lockwood legacy. How they'd been cheated and forgotten. She blamed dinosaurs for destroying the family name, for turning Lockwood from a name associated with wealth and prestige into a cautionary tale about scientific hubris. She wanted revenge, not just against dinosaurs, but against everyone who profited from them, who celebrated them, who thought coexistence was possible or desirable. And Din was the perfect target for that revenge. Take down the organization trying hardest to prove coexistence could work, and you prove it can't. You demonstrate that Hammond and Lockwood and everyone who came after were wrong from the beginning, that playing God with genetics only leads to disaster and death. Emily's plan was brilliant in its cruelty. Don't destroy Din from the outside like Extinction Now kept trying with their dramatic attacks. Destroy it from within, make it collapse under its own weight through accumulated failures, make it look like coexistence was always impossible, that the whole dream was naive stupidity doomed from the start. Malta's financial crisis that nearly shut down the facility? Lily engineered it through sabotage contracts and deliberately bad financial decisions before she even arrived to fix things. Then swooped in as the hero, gained access to financial systems across the entire network. Indonesia's disease outbreak that killed dozens of animals? She helped Extinction Now weaponize the pathogen and ensured it reached the facility through compromised supply chains. Every problem, every disaster, every crisis. She was behind them all or helped make them worse. And now she was planning something huge. Something final that would end DIN permanently. George cracked her most heavily encrypted communications and found the detailed plan. She was going to trigger simultaneous containment breaches at 6 major facilities, release carnivores into populated areas near Vegas, Hawaii, China, cause enough death and chaos and media coverage that the government would have no choice but to shut down the entire network immediately, implement emergency measures against all dinosaurs everywhere. It would justify mass culling. Controlled extinction dressed up as public safety. Everything Extinction Now wanted, achieved through orchestrated tragedy that looked like DIN's inevitable failure. "When is this supposed to happen?" Cabot asked, his voice barely above a whisper. His hands were shaking. George checked the timeline in the encrypted files. 72 hours. 3 days to stop the complete destruction of everything they'd built. 3 days to catch a traitor who had access to every system and the trust of everyone in the organization. 72 hours. 3 days to stop the end of everything. 3 days to catch someone who'd spent years positioning herself perfectly, building trust, gaining access to every critical system in the network. 3 days to save not just DIN, but the entire concept of human and dinosaur coexistence. The pressure was absolutely crushing. They couldn't just go to the Department of Fish and Wildlife with this information. Not yet. Not without absolutely ironclad proof that couldn't just disappear or get explained away. Lily had connections throughout the government. People who owed her favors. People she'd helped during their own crises. If they accused her without bulletproof evidence, she'd hear about it within hours. She'd disappear, activate her plans early, or just deny everything and make them look paranoid and incompetent. But no, they had to catch her in the act, red-handed with undeniable documentation, in a way that left zero room for doubt or manipulation. George assembled a team carefully, hand-picked people from across the DIN network who'd proven their loyalty over and over. People who'd been with the organization since the beginning, who'd survived the Indonesia outbreak, who'd defended facilities against Extinction Now attacks. People who believed in the mission deeply enough that they'd risk their careers and possibly their lives to protect it. They monitored Lily's movements without being obvious about it, tracked her communications through systems she didn't know George had access to. Watched her digital footprints, her physical location, waiting for her to make the move that would expose her completely. Lily was scheduled to visit the Hawaii facility in 48 hours. Luis had requested her help with some budget optimization issues, completely unaware of what she really was, what she was really planning. It was the perfect opportunity from George's perspective. Hawaii was isolated enough that they could control the situation, small enough that they could lock it down if needed, and it housed some of DIN's most valuable research, which meant Lily would absolutely prioritize it for sabotage. The plan was straightforward in concept, terrifying in execution. Let Lily access the system she planned to sabotage, let her think she was succeeding, document everything she did with multiple redundant recording systems, catch her in the act with evidence so overwhelming that no lawyer or government connection could make it disappear, then arrest her with federal agents standing by. Simple. Except nothing involving dinosaurs was ever actually simple. And Lily hadn't survived this long by being careless or predictable. Cabot flew to Hawaii ahead of her, trying to act normal despite the knot of anxiety in his stomach. Luis met him at the facility entrance, enthusiastic as always about the breeding program's latest successes. They just had another clutch hatch, 5 healthy juveniles from a species that was notoriously difficult to breed in captivity. It was a major scientific achievement. Luis was practically glowing with pride, showing Cabot the hatchlings in their climate-controlled nursery. "Look at them," Luis said with genuine wonder in his voice. 3 weeks ago, these guys didn't exist. Now they're here, healthy, with a real chance at a future. This is why we do what we do. This is why coexistence matters. Cabot watched the baby dinosaurs stumble around on wobbly legs and felt the weight of everything that was at stake. If Lily succeeded, these creatures would die. The breeding program would end. Everything Lewis had worked for, everything they'd all sacrificed and risked, would be destroyed. He couldn't let that happen. Lily arrived the next morning looking exactly like she always did. Professional, confident, carrying her tablet loaded with financial data and optimization strategies. She met with Luis in his office, reviewed budget reports, asked questions about facility operations, playing the role of helpful crisis manager absolutely perfectly. Anyone watching would see exactly what they expected to see. Someone doing their job, competently, maybe even compassionately. But George had surveillance on her that she didn't know existed. Cameras tracking her every movement, software monitoring her device activity in real time, microphones recording every word she said, and specialists analyzing it all, looking for the moment when the mask would slip. It came late that night when the facility was running on skeleton crew. Most staff had gone home or were sleeping in on-site quarters, just essential personnel monitoring the animals and maintaining critical systems. Lily waited until 2 in the morning, then moved. She accessed secure terminals using credentials she'd stolen months ago through her Crisis Manager access. Started inputting commands that would systematically disable security protocols across multiple enclosures. Not all at once, which would trigger immediate alarms, but in a cascading sequence that would create maximum chaos. Gates would unlock, barriers would drop, containment fields would power down, and by the time anyone realized what was happening, it would be too late to stop it. That's when Cabot walked into the control room. "Hello, Lily," or should I say Emily? She froze. Just for a single heartbeat, her fingers hovering over the keyboard before that professional mask slid back into place like nothing had happened. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said calmly. Her voice didn't even shake. But Cabot could see it in her eyes. The calculation happening, whether to keep lying, whether to run, whether to fight. "We know everything," Cabot said, keeping his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "The sabotage across every facility, your connection to Extinction Now. Your real identity is Emily Lockwood. Your plan to trigger containment breaches at 6 locations simultaneously. It's over. All of it." George stepped out from where he'd been waiting in the shadows, armed security personnel behind him. "Hey, you've already shut down your access codes across the network. Reverse the commands you just entered. Secured every facility. Your plan is dead." Lily's expression changed then. The professional mask melted away completely, replaced by something cold and furious, something that had probably been hiding under the surface the entire time. "Over?" she said, and laughed. "It's just beginning. You really think you've stopped this? I've been planning for years. You think I'd rely on just one approach? One set of access codes? One timeline? I've got people inside Extinction Now who don't even know they're working for me. Dead man switches that activate if I don't check in. Backup plans and contingencies you haven't even imagined. You can stop one attack, maybe 2, but not all of them, not everywhere at once." She had to be bluffing, trying to shake their confidence, buy time, create doubt, but then alarms started blaring, not just in Hawaii, across the network. Emergency alerts from Vegas, from China, from Indonesia, from Montana headquarters itself. All at once, all the same message. Critical security failure. Containment breach imminent. Multiple enclosures compromised. Lily's smile widened into something genuinely terrifying. "Too late," she said simply. "Too late to stop it. Too late to save any of it. This is how it ends. This is how coexistence fails. With chaos and death, and proof that humans and dinosaurs can never safely share the same world." All hell broke loose across the network simultaneously. It was coordinated chaos, timed perfectly to overwhelm response capabilities. Security systems at 6 different facilities went haywire at exactly the same moment. Gates unlocked without authorization, barrier systems powered down, containment fields collapsed, emergency protocols got overridden by commands buried deep in the system code, commands that had been waiting dormant for months. And dinosaurs, confused and alarmed by the sudden changes to their environments, started moving. Some fled in panic, others investigated the suddenly opened barriers with cautious curiosity. And the predators, the ones that had been securely contained specifically because they were dangerous, they didn't hesitate. They saw opportunities and took them. In Vegas, a Carnotaurus smashed through suddenly weakened fencing and headed straight toward the guest areas. The facility was open late for a special nighttime event, Hundreds of tourists were on the grounds when alarms started screaming, and staff started shouting at everyone to evacuate immediately. People panicked, ran in all directions, created more chaos. Isaac tried desperately to coordinate evacuation procedures while Georgia's security teams deployed with tranquilizer weapons. But tranquilizing a 3-ton predator before it reaches terrified civilians running through narrow pathways, that's not easy. That requires perfect shots under incredible pressure. In China, several of the giant sauropods stampeded when their enclosure systems failed. These massive herbivores weren't aggressive, would never intentionally hurt anyone, but they weighed as much as loaded semi-trucks. Their footsteps shook the ground like earthquakes. Anything in their path, buildings or vehicles or smaller dinosaurs, got crushed without the giants even noticing. Enclosure walls that were specifically designed and engineered to contain them suddenly had gaps, sections that had been systematically weakened through sabotage over months. The herbivores weren't trying to escape, they were just scared and running. But scared animals that size were as dangerous as any predator. Hawaii was the worst situation by far. The breeding facility housed juveniles and adolescents, dinosaurs at their most unpredictable developmental stages, not fully grown, but big enough to be dangerous, not fully trained to containment protocols. And Lily had specifically targeted the carnivore research section in her sabotage. Velociraptors, those terrifyingly intelligent hunters, discovered their enclosure doors standing wide open. They didn't hesitate for a second. They'd been testing those doors every single day since arriving at the facility, probing for weaknesses. Now, the weakness had appeared, and they moved immediately. Louise initiated emergency lockdown protocols, getting personnel into safe areas and sealing the laboratories, but the raptors were already loose in the facility. Already hunting! They moved like coordinated military units, communicating with each other through calls and body language, setting up ambushes and flanking maneuvers. These weren't mindless movie monsters, they were smart, adaptable, and absolutely deadly. Montana headquarters faced a different crisis. No dinosaurs escaped there, but the administrative systems got hit with sophisticated cyber attacks. Financial records corrupted, communication networks crashed, coordination between facilities became nearly impossible, right when it was most desperately needed. It was surgical sabotage, designed to prevent effective response to the physical breaches happening elsewhere. Cabot stood in the Hawaii control room, watching security feeds from multiple facilities display chaos simultaneously. This was the nightmare scenario, everything they'd worked to prevent happening everywhere at once. People were in danger, dinosaurs were in danger. The entire mission of coexistence was on the verge of catastrophic failure, broadcast live to the whole world. Kira was on emergency channels with the Department of Fish and Wildlife, basically screaming at them to send military support. "I need help, not political criticism," she shouted into her phone. "Send personnel, send equipment, send whatever it takes. But help us contain this before it spreads beyond DIN property into populated areas. Because if these animals reach civilian neighborhoods, if people start dying in their homes because of DIN's failures, it's over. Everything's over." George coordinated response across the network from Montana's backup command center, directing security teams, prioritizing threats, making impossible decisions about where to focus limited resources. "Vegas, concentrate on that Carnotaurus," he ordered through encrypted channels. "Tranquilize it before it reaches the main casino strip. Use lethal force only as absolute last resort, but don't let it reach civilians." China, use the sound barrier systems to herd those sauropods back toward their enclosure. They're not aggressive, just scared. Loud noises from the right directions will guide them back. "Hawaii," he paused, voice tight. "Hawaii, you're on your own. Deal with those raptors fast, whatever it takes." Cabot looked at Lily Halford, this woman who called herself a crisis manager, while creating the crises she pretended to solve. She was restrained now, security personnel holding her arms, but she was still smiling, still watching the chaos on screen monitors with satisfaction. "You're watching people die," Cabot said, barely controlling his rage. "Watching animals die. For what? Revenge against a family legacy that had nothing to do with these creatures." Lily's smile didn't fade. "I'm watching the inevitable happen, sooner rather than later," she replied coldly. "This was always how it would end. Disaster and death, and proof that playing God only destroys. You just refuse to see it. Refuse to accept that some things shouldn't be brought back, shouldn't be controlled, shouldn't exist in a world they don't belong in anymore." For just a moment, Cabot felt crushing despair. maybe she was right. Maybe Malcolm was right. Maybe everyone who said bringing dinosaurs back was humanity's biggest mistake was right. Maybe coexistence was always a naive dream doomed to fail. But then he heard Lewis's voice crackling through the radio, stressed but determined. "I've got eyes on the raptor pack. 3 of them, heading toward the breeding nursery. If they get to the hatchlings, if they reach the juveniles..." His voice cut off, but the implication was clear. The babies would be slaughtered. Months of work, years of genetic planning, irreplaceable young animals that represented the future of their species. All dead because of human betrayal and sabotage. The hatchlings, those baby dinosaurs Luis had shown him just yesterday, stumbling around on wobbly legs, blinking at the world with innocent curiosity. They hadn't done anything wrong, hadn't asked to be brought into existence, but they were here now, alive and vulnerable, and they deserved protection, deserved someone to fight for them. Cabot's despair transformed into iron determination. "I'm going in," he said, grabbing a tranquilizer rifle from the weapons locker. George's voice came through immediately on the radio. "That's suicide. Those are velociraptors in close quarters. You're not trained for that." "Then cover me," Cabot replied, already moving toward the door, "because I'm not letting those babies die. Not today. Not because of her." The Hawaii facility at night, during a containment crisis, was the most terrifying environment Cabot had ever experienced. Emergency lighting cast everything in blood-red illumination. Alarm sirens wailed constantly. In the distance, you could hear dinosaurs calling, some confused and scared, others aggressive and hunting. The normal sounds of the breeding facility, the gentle monitoring equipment and climate control systems were drowned out by chaos. Cabot moved as carefully as he could toward the nursery building, the breeding section where the youngest dinosaurs were kept in specialized enclosures designed to protect them until they were old enough to handle standard facilities. Velociraptors hunted in coordinated packs using strategy and communication that seemed impossibly intelligent. They were definitely already setting up an ambush. He wasn't wrong about that assessment. Movement flickered to his left. Cabot spun, aimed, fired the tranquilizer rifle. Missed. The raptor darted back into shadows before the dart hit nothing but wall. That was a distraction. A test to see how he'd react, how fast he could move, where his attention would focus, which meant the real attack was coming from somewhere else. He turned right just as another raptor lunged from behind equipment crates, got the shot off pure instinct. The dart hit center mass, and the animal went down within seconds, sedated but alive. 2 more appeared from different angles simultaneously, the classic pack flanking maneuver. Cabot got one, but the other was too fast, too close. He was about to die. This was how it ended. Then something massive moved between Cabot and the attacking raptor. A Brachiosaurus. One of the juveniles from the breeding program, maybe only 3 years old, but already the size of a large elephant. It had escaped its enclosure too when the barriers failed, but instead of fleeing to freedom or wandering away in confusion, it had positioned itself between the nursery building and the predators, protecting the babies inside. The velociraptor hesitated, suddenly faced with something 10 times its size that clearly wasn't moving. Even predators had survival instincts. Even pack hunters knew when they were outmatched. Cabot stared in absolute shock. This creature owed humanity nothing, had every reason to use the chaos as an opportunity to escape, to disappear into the Hawaiian wilderness and live free from human management, but instead it chose to stay, chose to defend lives that couldn't defend themselves, lives that weren't even the same species. If that wasn't coexistence, if that wasn't proof that these animals were more than just survival instincts and predatory drives, then what the hell was? George's security teams arrived moments later, tranquilizing the remaining raptors before they could regroup and try another attack. Luis got containment systems back online section by section, bringing order back to the facility, emergency power restored, barriers and locks, the crisis in Hawaii stabilized. Across the network, other teams were succeeding too. The Carnotaurus in Vegas took 4 tranquilizer darts, but finally went down just 50 meters from a group of panicked tourists. Close, way too close. But nobody died. The giant herbivores in China responded to sound barriers exactly like George predicted. Their stampede got redirected back toward their enclosure without anyone being crushed. Indonesia contained a pair of Dilophosaurus that had escaped before they could reach the facility perimeter. Montana's systems got restored through backup servers that Lily hadn't known existed. Facilities locked down one by one. Secured, contained, the crisis was stopped before it spread beyond DIN property into populated civilian areas. It wasn't clean by any measure. There were injuries, both staff and animals. A few dinosaurs died, some from stress, others from tranquilizer complications. One of the juvenile raptors in Hawaii had to be euthanized after it got trapped in wreckage and sustained injuries too severe to treat. Infrastructure damage across multiple facilities would take weeks or months to repair. But there were no human fatalities. Zero. Despite everything going wrong simultaneously, despite coordinated sabotage designed to cause maximum casualties, not a single person died, and most of the dinosaurs survived too. That wasn't luck, that was training, preparation, staff who cared deeply about both human and animal welfare. That was people like Luis and George and Dr. Harding, who'd spent years learning how to manage these situations. That was the system working even when it was pushed to absolute breaking point. Willie's plan failed, barely, hanging by the thinnest thread imaginable, but it failed. She'd tried to prove that coexistence was impossible, that human and dinosaur could never safely share space, that disaster was inevitable. Instead, she proved that even under deliberate sabotage, even with systems compromised and security breached, DIN could respond and protect both species. That coexistence was possible if people were willing to fight for it. The Department of Fish and Wildlife descended on DIN like a bureaucratic hurricane. Investigators, auditors, policy experts, lawyers, all demanding detailed answers. How did this happen? Who was responsible? What systemic failures allowed such extensive sabotage? What safeguards broke down? Kira worked essentially around the clock managing the political fallout. She laid out everything they'd discovered about Lily Halford, her real identity as Emily Lockwood, her multi-year infiltration operation. The evidence George had compiled was overwhelming and undeniable. Financial records proving payments from Extinction Now front companies, communication logs showing her coordinating attacks, security footage placing her at the scenes of critical sabotage, testimony from the Extinction Now operatives she'd manipulated, who'd thought they were working for the cause but were really just pawns in her personal revenge scheme. Emily Lockwood was arrested and charged with domestic terrorism, attempted murder, conspiracy to commit mass casualty attacks, sabotage of critical infrastructure, and approximately 40 other federal crimes. Her network of contacts inside Extinction Now got exposed and dismantled. Some were true believers in the extinction cause. Others were like Emily, using the movement for personal agendas. Law enforcement rolled up the entire cell. The terrorist threat wasn't completely eliminated. Extremists never fully disappear, but it was severely damaged. Extinction Now went from organized threat to scattered remnants practically overnight. But the damage to DIN's public reputation was severe and would take much longer to repair. Media coverage was absolutely brutal. Every news channel ran stories about the containment breaches with dramatic footage and alarming headlines. Talking heads questioned whether dinosaurs could ever be safely managed, regardless of human intentions. Politicians grandstanded, calling for stricter regulations, some even demanding the network be dissolved entirely and all dinosaurs be relocated to remote island facilities. Or worse, the court of public opinion was harsh and unforgiving. One coordinated sabotage attack had undone months of positive press and patient relationship building. Cavett stood before the Department of Fish and Wildlife Oversight Board, knowing that DIN's entire future hung in the balance. These people would decide whether the network continued or got shut down permanently, whether coexistence got another chance, or whether humanity gave up on the whole concept. We failed, he said simply, not trying to hide from responsibility, not because coexistence is fundamentally impossible, but because we were betrayed from within. Someone exploited the trust we built and used it as a weapon against us and the animals we're trying to protect. That's on us for not catching it sooner, for not having better internal security, for being naive about human motivations. He paused, looking at each board member directly. But here's what also happened during that crisis. When containment failed and dinosaurs escaped and people were in genuine danger, our teams responded effectively. They risked their own safety to protect both humans and animals. They succeeded under conditions deliberately designed for failure. And perhaps most importantly, the dinosaurs themselves showed capacity for something beyond just survival instinct or predatory drive. He told them about the juvenile Brachiosaurus in Hawaii, how it chose to protect the nursery instead of escaping to freedom, how a 3-year-old animal made a decision that looked an awful lot like compassion or altruism, or whatever you want to call it, when someone protects the vulnerable, even at personal risk. This creature owed us nothing, Cabot said, emotion creeping into his voice despite his efforts to stay professional. Had every reason to run, but it stayed and defended babies that weren't even its own species. That's not programming, that's not trained behavior, that's something deeper, something that suggests these animals are capable of coexistence if we give them the environment and opportunity. Life finds a way, Cabot continued, deliberately echoing Malcolm's famous phrase. Dr. Malcolm's been saying that for decades, and he's absolutely right. Life is chaotic and unpredictable and breaks through every constraint we build. But maybe, just maybe, life finds a way toward cooperation, toward mutual survival, toward sharing space instead of fighting for dominance. If we don't let fear and sabotage and human cruelty dictate our choices, if you're willing to learn from failures and keep trying to do better. The board deliberated for what felt like forever. Hours turned into days of closed-door meetings, arguments, policy debates, political maneuvering. The decision could genuinely go either way. Din had proven both that coexistence was possible and that it was incredibly difficult, that it required constant vigilance and could be undermined by bad actors. Whether that was enough to justify continuation, or whether it proved the whole concept was too risky, that was the question they struggled with. Finally, after nearly a week of deliberation that aged Cabot about 10 years, they announced their verdict. Din would continue operations with significant changes, stricter oversight, reformed security protocols, and transparent reporting requirements that would make it much harder to hide problems. But the fundamental mission would go on. The attempt at coexistence would get another chance. Humanity wasn't giving up yet. Cabot felt relief so intense it almost knocked him over. They'd survived. Barely, battered and bruised and forced to completely rebuild trust, but they survived. The mission would continue. The months after Emily Lockwood's betrayal were incredibly hard. Staff morale was understandably low. People felt violated by the infiltration, questioning who they could trust. Public confidence was damaged severely. Funding became tighter as nervous investors pulled back. Every single decision got scrutinized and second-guessed by oversight committees. But slowly, painfully, methodically, Din rebuilt itself into something stronger. George implemented security systems that were practically impossible to bypass without multiple people noticing. Multi-layered authentication requiring biometric verification and behavioral analysis. Constant monitoring with AI systems looking for anomalies. Redundant protocols that ensured no single person could compromise critical systems. He basically turned Din facilities into fortresses, but did it carefully so they didn't feel like prisons. The animals and staff still had quality of life, they just also had security. Luis expanded the breeding program with renewed energy, showing tangible results that proved the science worked. Healthy populations with genuine genetic diversity, species that were actively thriving under careful management rather than just surviving. Juveniles growing into adults that exhibited natural behaviors and social structures. The numbers didn't lie. Coexistence produced better outcomes than either captivity or completely unmanaged wilderness. Dr. Harding developed disease monitoring systems after the Indonesia outbreak that could detect potential threats incredibly early. Network of sensors and regular health screenings and AI analysis of behavioral patterns that might indicate illness before symptoms appeared. Her work created an early warning system that would prevent future outbreaks from spreading, like the engineered bioweapon had. She saved countless lives through that research, both dinosaur and human. Isaac in Vegas actually toned down the pure entertainment aspects of his facility, focusing more on education and genuine appreciation of the animals. Turns out, people enjoyed learning about dinosaur behavior and evolution and ecology almost as much as watching feeding shows. Revenue stayed strong, actually grew, but with much better ethical foundations. The guests who visited Vegas now left with real understanding rather than just thrilling memories. The China Sanctuary became an international model for large-scale herbivore management. Organizations from around the world studying how to integrate megafauna into modern ecosystems came there to learn techniques. Din was sharing knowledge freely, helping anyone who wanted to improve their relationship with dinosaurs or other large animals. The mission was bigger than just one network. Malta finally achieved genuine financial stability without sabotage undermining progress, became a profitable operation specializing in nocturnal species research. The night exhibitions that struggled initially became popular as word spread about how unique and beautiful they were. The debt got paid off completely. The facility thrived. Japan's restoration finished, transforming the old failed park into a living museum, a place where people could learn about both the triumphs and the catastrophic mistakes of dinosaur history, where the complicated legacy of de-extinction got explored honestly, without propaganda or bias. It became required visiting for anyone studying genetics or conservation, or ethics of extinct species revival. The Lockwood Estate Training Center, run by Ellie Sattler, produced a new generation of scientists and managers who thought critically about these issues, who understood that genetic power came with massive responsibility, who wouldn't repeat the mistakes of Hammond or Wu or InGen, who saw dinosaurs as living beings deserving respect rather than as products or attractions or tools. The culture was slowly changing through education. Public perception gradually shifted as months passed without new disasters. The containment breaches got reframed in media coverage, not as proof that coexistence was impossible, but as evidence that human sabotage and terrorism were greater threats than the animals themselves. That with proper systems and dedicated people, even deliberate attacks could be survived and overcome. Guest numbers recovered slowly, then accelerated. Revenue stabilized and grew. More facilities opened in new locations with updated protocols and better security. Most importantly, research data accumulated showing that dinosaurs in DIN facilities were measurably healthier than their wild counterparts. They lived longer on average, showed more diverse natural behaviors, had lower stress markers, better reproduction rates. The managed coexistence wasn't perfect, would never be perfect, but it was working. Actually working based on objective scientific measures rather than just hopeful rhetoric. About a year after the crisis, Ian Malcolm visited DIN headquarters again. Cabot honestly wasn't sure what to expect. More warnings about chaos and hubris, more predictions of inevitable disaster. Malcolm had earned his pessimism, but the mathematician surprised him. "You've done better than I expected," Malcolm admitted, watching dinosaurs graze peacefully in carefully managed enclosures visible from the headquarters observation deck. "I still think bringing them back was a fundamental mistake. I still think humanity's playing with forces beyond our complete understanding or control. Chaos theory doesn't stop applying just because you want it to. But if we're stuck with the consequences of our collective hubris, if dinosaurs are here to stay whether we like it or not, this approach is probably the least terrible way to handle it." Coming from Ian Malcolm, that was basically a glowing endorsement. "We learned from your warnings," Cabot said, standing beside him at the observation window, "about not trying to control everything perfectly, about respecting what these creatures actually are rather than what we want them to be, about the chaos that inevitably follows when humans think they can manage nature like a spreadsheet. Your pessimism helped us build better systems because we planned for failure instead of assuming success." Malcolm nodded slowly, watching a Parasaurolophus call to its mate across the enclosure. The sound echoed beautifully across the valley. "Life finds a way," he said quietly, almost to himself. I've said that phrase so many times it's practically become my catchphrase, usually as a warning about how life breaks containment. But maybe there's another interpretation. Maybe life finds a way toward balance when given the chance, toward cooperation instead of just competition. He glanced at Cabot. "Don't let that make you overconfident. Chaos is still chaos. Disaster is still possible. But you've earned provisional respect for what you've built here. Keep earning it every day." That was the closest to approval Malcolm had ever given anything related to dinosaurs. Cabot would take it. Dr. Ellie Sattler joined them at the observation window, carrying coffee for all three. She'd been meeting with young scientists at the Lockwood Estate all morning, teaching them about the ethics they'd need to navigate in their careers. "You know what I told those students today?" she said, handing out coffee cups. "I told them that bringing dinosaurs back was playing God, that it created problems and responsibilities we're still figuring out, but that running away from those responsibilities would be even worse than creating them in the first place. We made these creatures exist. Now we owe them a world where they can thrive. That's not optional. That's basic ethics." The three of them stood there watching dinosaurs live their lives in the valley below. These ancient creatures existing in a modern world through human intervention and ongoing human support. It wasn't natural by any traditional definition. But it wasn't wrong either. It was just complicated. Like most things involving life and death and the spaces between. Kira found them eventually because she always needed Cabot for some administrative crisis or oversight meeting. But she paused when she saw the three of them standing together. Malcolm the pessimist, Sattler the ethicist, Finch the manager. Three people with very different perspectives on dinosaurs, but united by the reality that these creatures existed now and deserved consideration. The Department of Fish and Wildlife approved funding for 3 new facilities, she said, a small smile on her usually serious face. They're also loosening some of the restrictions they imposed after the Lockwood crisis, said Din, has proven itself capable of handling security threats and maintaining welfare standards, even under extraordinary circumstances. We're growing again. Growth meant more dinosaurs protected, more research conducted, more people educated, more chances to prove that coexistence worked. But it also meant more responsibility, more risk, more opportunities for failure. The balance never got easier, they'd just gotten better at maintaining it. Over the following years, Din continued expanding carefully, new facilities in South America, Africa, Australia, each one adapted to local ecosystems and cultures, each one learning from the successes and failures that came before. The network became truly global, a worldwide effort to integrate dinosaurs into modern life as permanently as possible. Wild dinosaur populations, the ones living completely outside human management in forests and mountains and jungles, slowly stabilized too. Some species thrived, others struggled. Nature was figuring out where these prehistoric creatures fit into modern food webs and ecosystems. It was messy and chaotic, exactly like Malcolm predicted. But it was also working itself out through the natural processes of adaptation and evolution happening in real time. Extinction now never completely disappeared, extremists rarely do, but they became marginalized, reduced to fringe protests rather than coordinated terrorism. Most people accepted that dinosaurs were here to stay, and the question wasn't whether to have them, but how to live alongside them responsibly. That cultural shift was maybe Din's biggest achievement, changing the conversation from should they exist to how do we coexist well. Public opinion polls showed increasing support for dinosaur conservation and integration. New generations grew up with dinosaurs as just part of normal reality, not as science fiction or disaster scenarios. Kids visited Din facilities on school field trips. Universities offered degrees in paleoecology and extinction-age wildlife management. It became a career path, a field of study, a permanent part of human civilization. The breeding programs produced results that even skeptics couldn't deny. Genetic diversity increased across multiple species. Populations that had been on the verge of dying out achieved stable numbers. Some dinosaurs bred successfully in the wild for the first time since being brought back. That was the ultimate goal. Self-sustaining populations that didn't require constant human intervention. Species that could exist naturally in modern ecosystems alongside contemporary wildlife. It would take generations to fully achieve that, maybe centuries, but the foundation was being built through careful science and patient dedication. George eventually retired from Din security, training his replacement personally to maintain the paranoid vigilance that kept everyone safe. He'd earned his rest after years of protecting both people and dinosaurs from threats both external and internal. Luis stayed with the Hawaii breeding program, becoming one of the world's leading experts on dinosaur reproduction and genetics. His research papers got published in the most prestigious journals. His techniques got adopted globally. Dr. Harding moved between facilities as a troubleshooter, showing up wherever problems emerged and solving them through brilliant veterinary science and deep understanding of dinosaur physiology. Ellie Sattler continued teaching at the Lockwood estate, shaping minds and ethics, making sure the next generation understood the weight of what they were doing. Kira eventually moved up to director of the entire Department of Fish and Wildlife, using that position to protect Din and expand dinosaur conservation efforts across all government agencies. She became one of the most powerful advocates for coexistence in the world. And Cabot kept managing the network, growing older and more experienced, making mistakes and learning from them, celebrating successes and mourning failures. It was his life's work, the thing he'd be remembered for. Managing director of the organization that proved humans and dinosaurs could share one planet. Years later, Cabot returned to Montana. to the first facility they'd built, where this whole thing started with empty land and ambitious dreams. The facility had grown enormously since those early days. More species, better infrastructure, larger staff, but the core mission hadn't changed. Provide safe space for dinosaurs while helping humans understand them as living beings deserving respect and consideration. He walked through the same paths he'd walked during construction, remembering how uncertain everything felt back then. How many people said it couldn't work, that coexistence was naive fantasy. How close they'd come to proving those critics right. A family walked past him on the path, parents with 2 young kids, maybe 6 and 8 years old. The kids were absolutely enthralled, pointing at an Edmontosaurus herd grazing peacefully in the distance. "Look how big they are," one child said with pure wonder. "Do you think they're scared of us?" the parent answered thoughtfully. "I think they're used to us. We share space with them respectfully, and they share space with us." That's called coexistence. The kids seemed to accept that naturally, like it was the most obvious thing in the world, because for them, it was. They'd grown up in a world where dinosaurs existed and humans learned to live alongside them. It wasn't science fiction or disaster movie, it was just life. Cabot smiled, watching them walk away, the kids chattering excitedly about everything they were seeing. That's what success looked like. Not perfect systems or zero failures or complete control, just people and dinosaurs sharing space, learning from each other, finding ways to coexist that honored both species. It was messy and complicated and required constant work, but it was real, it was happening. Life had found a way. Not the way anyone originally planned or expected, but a way that worked well enough. A way that could continue indefinitely if humans stayed committed to making it work. That was enough. After everything they'd been through, all the disasters and betrayals and near failures, that was more than enough. The sun was setting over Montana, painting the sky in oranges and purples. Dinosaurs settled into evening routines, calling to each other across enclosures. Staff finished daily tasks and headed home to families. The facility powered down to night operations, quieter but always staffed, always vigilant. Cabot stood there, watching it all, feeling the weight of responsibility and the satisfaction of purpose. Genetic power, he thought, echoing the phrase that started this whole journey. The most awesome force the planet has ever seen. They'd used it to bring back creatures that vanished millions of years ago, put them on display, tried to profit from them, nearly destroyed them multiple times through human arrogance and greed. But ultimately, through effort and sacrifice and stubborn refusal to give up, they'd found a better way. Not perfect, never perfect, but better than extinction, better than cages, better than the disasters that came before. Life finds a way, and humans, despite all their flaws and failures, could find ways to work with life instead of just trying to dominate it. That was the real lesson of the Dinosaur Integration Network. That was what coexistence actually meant. Not control, not dominance, not perfect harmony, just respect, adaptation, and the willingness to keep trying even when it got hard, especially when it got hard. Cabot turned and walked back toward headquarters, leaving the dinosaurs to their evening in peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new problems to solve, new decisions to make, but that was okay. That was the job. That was the mission he'd chosen, and would keep choosing every day for the rest of his career. The age of dinosaurs hadn't ended 65 million years ago after all. It had just paused. And now, through genetic power and human determination and a whole lot of messy, complicated coexistence, it continued. Different than before, but continuing. That was something worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth dedicating a life to. And as long as people like Cabot and Louise and George and Kira and all the others kept fighting for it, kept believing in it, kept working to make it better, the age of dinosaurs would continue far into the future. The story of Jurassic World evolution wasn't about theme parks or genetic engineering or even really about dinosaurs. It was about whether humanity could learn from its mistakes, whether people could put aside ego and greed and short-term thinking to build something sustainable and ethical and meaningful, whether coexistence between species was possible when one of them had the power to bring the other back from extinction. The answer, hard won through years of struggle and sacrifice and near disasters, was yes, it was possible. It was happening, and it would keep happening as long as people were willing to do the work. That was the real triumph, not the science or the facilities or the impressive dinosaurs. The triumph was humans choosing to be better. choosing cooperation over domination, choosing long-term sustainability over short-term profit, choosing to honor life in all its forms, even life we created through our own hubris. That choice, made every single day by thousands of people across the DIN network, was what made coexistence real. And in the end, that was the only story that mattered.